This is Jeanette Butterworth with Western North Carolina Nonprofit Pathways. If y'all could give me a little thumbs up that you are hearing me in the chat box, we'll know that our audio is working, or a little shout out of something. Good. Oh, good. Yay. Thumbs up. Shouts out. Yay. Great. Thanks, all. We have about 50 folks on here. Probably have some more that will join as we go along. And we are recording, so we'll be able to get the recording out to everybody, no matter when they join or if you happen to get called away, which happens often these days. So don't worry, we've got you covered. We will send out a link to the recording after we're done. So I just want to say welcome to everybody. I'm so glad y'all joined us. Pathways is here always for nonprofits in the Western North Carolina region. Our mission at Nonprofits is you. Our mission is to make sure that nonprofits have all the tools and support and resources possible to do your jobs and to further your missions and serve your communities. So it's an honor to be able to help provide a little bit of that for y'all. And just a reminder that we are here. And if you need a shoulder to cry on or a sounding board for an idea, or you're looking for a resource, please reach out to one of us at Pathways. We are happy to help you. Pathways folks, Debbie is here from Pathways. Debbie Hager and myself will be on the webinar, but we're gonna turn our cameras and mute ourselves just like the rest of y'all are. We'll keep up with what's going on in the chat box and help with any technical difficulties that you may have, but we'll be here. But I do just want to turn this over to Jeanne and to thank you, Jeanne Allen, for offering this time with us. It's such a gift. I really appreciate it. You reached out at just the right time with just the right topic for us to learn from you about. And for those of you that don't already know Jeanne, she has been working in the sector for 30 years, according to her bio. And she's an instructor with the Duke Nonprofit Management Program. She's a consultant to nonprofits in North Carolina and across the country and surely across the world. So reach out to Jeanne if there's something that you'd like to connect with her about too after this. I'm excited that she's going to present to us. Jeanne always brings a fun twist and great cutting edge ideas to different topics. So I'm going to be taking lots of notes myself while we go along. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jeanne. And I do want to say that at the end, we have a survey that we'd love for y'all to fill out for us, just to give us a little feedback. It won't take but just a minute. We'll send you that link when we're done. I also put it in the chat box, hoping that it would be a hot link, but it's not. So you can cut and paste it and do it, or we will send you the link when we get done here, along with a copy of the slides and the recording. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to Jeanne. And Jeanne, if I do see a question or topic in the chat box that goes along with what you're saying, I'll pop up and say it with my audio, but I'll just keep my video off.
Okay, just jump in.
All right.
Greetings. I thought about board meetings and how everybody was throwing them online and thought, how can we make these be better? So that's the whole idea here. Now, a lot of these ideas you could use for a volunteer training or anything else, but the specifics that make this an online board meeting is it's kind of a contained group. So that's kind of my thinking here. You're going to have 6, 8, 12, whatever number of your board members, and you already have a purpose. So you don't have to go through thinking how all those different pieces. So those are kind of the assumptions I make. But a lot of these ideas, it's just about how to have a good online meeting, but I'm skipping over the pieces where you might have to bring a lot of people in who don't know each other. So this is a little bit about me. Jeanette already told you about that. I do bring some board source material. I've met with some of you in the highlands of North Carolina. I'm down here in the flatlands in Durham, but that's not too far away. We're all having a little bit colder weather today. So let's jump into board meetings. So we're not going to be using Zoom meetings today, but I put this up here just to let people see it's all about positioning your page. When you do something, you can move the screen over, you can move the chat box in, you can show people. So you can do all this in almost all the platforms. Now today I said we're not platform focused because some people use Microsoft Teams, some people use Google Hangouts, some people use Skype. A lot of these platforms are all moving in the same direction. I mean, I personally love what you can do in Zoom with breaking out into groups. we're not doing that. You have to practice on your own to see how great it is. The first time I tried it, I was successful, so it's not a real learning curve. I was put in a group as a attendee at one time, and the next time I tried it as a facilitator of the meeting. Both times it was perfect. So just wanted you to see how you can move your screen about when you're in a meeting, because if you're doing a board meeting and you want to show, you could put a Google Doc there instead of a slide. You could put some Excel spreadsheet you're working on. You could still see all the faces of the people who are in your meeting, and you can still have a chat box going. If we were doing an interactive meeting, I'm going to show you this as a way to use the annotation tools. So you could put some question up there, and then you ask people to go to the annotation tools, which is in that slide I just showed you, where they go. Let's see, I'll go back there. See up there under the yellow circle where the red circle is, you can pick a check mark out. So you can show people how to do that, and then you can ask a question and get people to answer. So I just plopped a few in here so you could see, but it's another way of getting people to give an answer. Surely you know you can use a chat box, but I just wanted to show you a way that you could use people being interactive. If you're thinking of a board meeting and you have 3 ideas that you want to talk about, then you could put each of the ideas up here and have people do a check mark and have them kind of get a sense visually of where you are on an issue. This is my visual of number 1 is what our board meetings used to look like. We kind of fell into number 2, and now we're in number 3. And the idea is, how can you bring to life a screen of people who are just sitting there? I'm going to talk about before the meeting, some things you can do. I'm going to talk about during the meeting, and then talk about after the meeting. And then at the very end, I'll look at technology, but from a really high level, not specific platforms, but just all the different ways you can consider using tech in your meetings. There's a lot of great ideas happening. What's really fun about this is we're all going to learn how to be much more effective and efficient and better at these online board meetings. And I even heard somebody say the other day, our goal should be to even have a better meeting than we would have person to person. And I thought about that, and it's possible because you can do interactions and you can do conversations. And there's a comment here. It says, "May I please ask, are we speaking about Zoom meetings or webinars or both?" So I'm talking about meetings. I'm talking about having a board meeting on some platform. Today, you're sitting on Zoom webinar, so you don't have all the functionality that you would have in a Zoom meeting. But if we put it into Zoom meeting today, there wouldn't be as many people allowed in. So in order to allow the number of people who are interested, you're on webinar, and I'm talking about having meetings. Many people are not going to use Zoom meetings. I have people who already told me they have to use WebEx or some other product. So the ideas here transfer to all the web pages. So before the meeting, what do you want to think about before you jump into having your online meeting? This is a moment in time to embrace the consent agenda. If you haven't moved towards that, this is like your invitation. You can read about consent agendas. Your school boards and your city councils use something similar to that. You may have heard about it, you may not. I'm not going to go deep into that. But the idea of a consent agenda is you're spending time on what's most important for everyone in the room to hear. You're not going to spend time on having each committee report out all their details of what happened on their committee meetings, which has never been a great practice, but this is the best time to just kind of jump out of that and move to a consent agenda where you can put everything that just needs to be voted on at the front of the meeting, and then it's gone. And then we have time to have better discussions. You want to schedule your discussions, maybe 15 minutes into the meeting, maybe 20, but when you know you have everybody there, and design your agenda thinking about that. How can we get people together? How can we make sure we're all looking at the same stuff? And then what's interesting is there's more prep needed for an online meeting. So if I were to come in and do a facilitation of a meeting, I could read the room, I could trust my gut, I could see who's kind of happy or not, and I could call on somebody spontaneously. There's a little less room, maybe a lot less room for spontaneity. So you got to plan. And also what that means for me is I plan, when am I going to do a chat box? When am I going to do a thumbs up? When am I going to do groups? Whatever it is you're going to do, you put a note in there, because that way you make sure you're building in the engagement and you're involving everybody. I'm seeing that there's a lot of static in the audio, and I noticed that was there, Jeanette, when you were talking. So it's not coming from this end, I don't believe. But I'll keep working on that. The next thing to think about.
Jeanne, I'm sorry, it took me a second to unmute. It might help if to put on a headset is what we just found out. So I'm not sure if that would help or not, but it's not too bad that we can't listen and hear. But if you
Okay.
have one right there, you might pop it on.
Yeah, I don't have one available right now.
Alrighty.
I mean, I used this all day yesterday and I didn't have that issue. So I don't know that it's this connection.
Right.
And it started for me when you were talking. So I think it might have something to do with some initial connection out there.
With the Zoom. Yeah. All right. It's not so bad that we can't understand them.
I know they always say audio is important. It is. So you may end up with a bad audio during your board meeting. So now we know that's what I find right now is we're all in this practice time of learning together. So that's the greatest part of this is I find people are very patient because we all feel like we are trying this. So that's why it's the best time to try new things and see what works. I haven't heard people complain as much as sit there and be patient and be willing to learn because, well, one, they're stuck at home, but two, everybody's kind of interested in learning this stuff. So this slide that I'm showing you is the idea of part of your pre-planning is thinking what makes a good meeting and then build that in and what makes a bad meeting and get rid of that. So what makes a good meeting often is when people are talking to each other, when there's an interesting agenda, when we have meaningful questions. So you can build that into your meeting now. And what makes meetings bad tends to be one person running on. We're going to talk about ways you can deal with that. What makes a meeting bad is when people aren't sure what direction you're going. So you just need to work on it before you sit down, get a tighter agenda, be clear of kind of between the executive director and the board chair, who's going to be facilitating the meeting and what are the roles. And certainly the second or third time you do this, it'll be a little easier. But what I have noticed when I get on meetings, everybody sits there and nobody talks because they all don't know who should be talking. So people are just really polite sitting there and they just need somebody to step up and be in charge of the meeting. So that's what you want to show up with. You test your mic and video, which we did today. It was working then. Know how to record in case you want to record. But the big question here is determine if you should record a board meeting. And basically I say that because sometimes we record everything now because we think it's great and it's a good idea. I would not recommend recording a board meeting. And here's my reasons. One, it becomes part of the documentation of your organization. It can be part of your legal documents. Why would you want that? Two, if you don't usually record your board meetings in the room, I wouldn't start recording them by video because you really want people to show up. And if I know the board meeting's recorded, I might be less likely to show up and then there's less engagement. These are business meetings. These aren't trainings where I don't have to be there. So you got to put that mindset on that we're trying to all be together in the same room to have a conversation and do business. We're not just trying to offer an easy way for you to not have to drive somewhere when we get back to being able to drive places. So the idea would be make a decision as to why you're going to record if you just decide to. Don't just do it because you can. And most of the time, I think you're going to be advised by your legal advisors to really deeply consider whether you really want to tape it or not. Practice sharing the screen with whoever you're going to be practicing with. And what I often say to people is you could say the meeting starts at 2, and if you have any technology problems, call in at 1:45. We're going to practice sharing the screen. We're going to practice muting and then unmuting, showing a video, undoing your video, all of that so that at 2 o'clock we'll be ready to go. And give people a chance to just practice and kind of have fun. And then watch your back, which is why I have the screen behind me. It's just be aware of what's behind you, especially if you're at home and people are running through your house or if you have animals that might show up. You want to ask people, this is a business meeting. We want to get some business done. So if you're able to get into a room where it's quiet or if you can have a backdrop that works. I was on a call recently with someone and she had a window behind her, which was a bright sunny day. And then she said, and she sat there talking, we couldn't see her face at all. It was kind of like she was on a hostage video. So just be aware of what's behind you and be conscious of how you can help that with your meeting. Here's some ideas when you're thinking which platform you're going to use, whether it's WebEx, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Skype, Google Hangouts. I know people who like to use WebEx because somebody on their board has a corporate account or a business account and they can use it. That can be useful as long as you just understand what the limitations are and how it's useful to you. Number one is, will everyone have access to it? That's the idea behind actually today and having some audio issues. Sometimes what I see with Zoom recently has been some people come into the meeting and they can show their face at the beginning and we connect in, and then they mute their face because there's not the width of the broadband they need isn't strong enough to do video and audio. So just be aware sometimes that it starts drawing down on the broadband if there's a lot of videos. So some people may need to check in and check out in terms of video. I mean, I think the beauty of all these is we can meet in person and see each other. So it feels like it's in person. But be aware that some people's video connections are going to draw down on all the ability for them to even talk. The next one, utility, will support the work we're doing. If you're working in Windows, you want to use Teams probably because it can connect to everything else you're doing. If you use your somebody's company WebEx, just make sure it can merge into the platforms that you want to use. You just want to not just grab something because somebody knows how to use it, but make sure it works the best for you. What's the cost? If you don't know, Zoom is available through TechSoup, and they have a nonprofit license, which I think they dropped the price recently, is what somebody told me. It was $65 a couple of weeks ago, and now it's $30, something in there. So think about, is Zoom right for you? We're going to talk about the security issues in just a second. The next one is technical support. So you get a situation like today where there's a rough sound. You have to decide, do we all call back? But I'm not paying attention to that. That's something Jeanette's going crazy dealing with right now, or Debbie, who's behind the scenes. The technical support also is the idea of trying out this beforehand. Every time I've done one of these webinars with somebody, we always connect ahead of time and make sure we got everything going. And you know what? We had really good audio at that point. So what can you say? Number 5, security issues. I'm sure you've heard about the Zoom bombing. It's interesting because what Zoom did was work really hard on making their program really intuitive and useful and easy. And the first time on, it's really easy to use. But what they didn't spend their time on was the security. And they're finding that out now. So they've done some new pieces where people have to wait in a waiting room for you to let them in. But the really key to making Zoom work would be not to place your Zoom link out in Facebook or in public. Make people sign up and then send the Zoom link to people that you know have signed up. You have their emails. And that's kind of one way around that. And I think Zoom's doing a whole lot of work, but now they've got to catch up with a bad reputation. Again, I'm not a proponent of just Zoom, but it's easy to jump on like this. And for the small nonprofits that don't have a lot of tech, you can do 40 minutes free. And I've been with nonprofits who did that, and the meeting runs out at 40 minutes and they all call in and they have another 40 minutes. So it's kind of funny, but that's kind of the way they make it work for them. And the last one is, can we train people? Again, if you have WebEx, you might spend time ahead of time making sure everybody understands the nuances. Training on Zoom has been fairly easy. People might be very familiar with Google Hangouts, but allow some time before your meeting. Don't assume people, even though they're good at Zoom, they might be horrible at Google Hangouts. They all have their dashboards a little bit different. So just offer time before the meeting starts and ask people to come in and let's just practice with the technology so you can really have an effective meeting. Those are some of the ideas before the meeting. Now during the meeting, what you need to do that you might not think of when you're face-to-face is you need to connect people. We sometimes jump into these meetings. We see all these faces, we just jump in. But there's really a need, people need to connect right now more than ever, but still when we're online, we need to connect. So I'll give you some ideas on how to connect, but just, again, that goes back to your strategies of how do you set up these meetings. And you may not think about connecting in a face-to-face meeting, but think of a way you can make that happen. Encourage collaborative problem solving. You can do that through doing a Google Docs and sharing that. I could put the Google Docs up here and share on the screen, and we could have everybody type in. I mean, one of the great ideas around that would be have everybody type at the same time, put their name and answer, do a kind of a think and write, and have everybody put their ideas in at the same time. And then you can all look at what everybody was writing. So that's a way to get people sharing where we're not all talking at the same time. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Give agenda time to everybody. Make sure everybody has a chance to say something or talk. You don't want your board chair or the executive director to be the only ones. You probably do that on face-to-face, but again, I'm just trying to make you remember it's even more important in these meetings because you don't want people checking out. When I say kill the mute, what I would say is teach everybody how to mute themselves and unmute fairly quickly. So you might have a meeting, which I've had meetings with 12 people, and we're all unmuted and it worked. But then suddenly somebody's house starts having a sound in the background, so they can quickly mute, And then if you want to call on them, you can call on them and they can answer. So you just want to have people not just going to mute automatically, but having a way where people are comfortable unmuting and muting and learning how they can quickly join in. I'm going to talk about multitasking in a minute when I say set some rules, but you really want to encourage people. The reason I like video is the meetings I've been in have been phenomenal because people are really engaged with each other. They look at each other's faces. Everybody, you can always see them looking around and looking at who's in the meeting and who's talking. It's a lot easier to have people who aren't multitasking and reading their email and doing everything else when you do video. But just in case, just say that out loud. You got to be more intentional with what some of the behaviors we need. So I said connecting people. These are the two ideas that I have found about icebreakers when I've been out there researching what people are doing. And the two ideas, we get everybody to take a picture of their shoes, and then you can either show it like this by everybody putting their phone up and sharing their picture. You can take a picture of an object on their desk or their table they're sitting at. Or another one I've seen is take a picture out the window. What's happening out your window? It's just, again, it's just a way to let people connect with each other. You might have boards that are all in the same zip code, and you might have boards that are spread across all the mountains of North Carolina or North Carolina and Tennessee, or, you know, a multi-state. So it's just a way to have people connect. I'm just going to show you a picture of what it looks like. These are some examples. People took pictures of their shoes or what's on their desk. And then here's what it looked like when one group shared it on the screen. So that was all there. They all have pictures of their feet. So it gives you something to laugh about and something to have fun with. And, you notice I had this going, just have ways to be fun, because we're all stressed and you want to make your meeting productive, but you want to have some fun there too. I have put this up here several times and asked people, do they like view 1 or 2? And what surprised me, being the extrovert, where I thought everybody would pick 1. No, it's really pretty split. And a lot of people like the idea of not showing their face. So you could ask your board, kind of get a sense of where they are and say, how do we create a way where people will share their faces and just get to find out what's going on for people. I know we're all like on the 7th week of our 4-week haircuts and we're all crazy and don't want people to see us. But you could ask people, let's try to experiment with being video. And you can sit a little farther away from the camera if you don't want people to see everything about your house or your hairdo. But just practice with people using video, and you could ask people what they like better, 1 or 2. I'm going to talk to you about roles, assigning roles. More important on a meeting like this, and I think this is the key. The facilitation of these meetings and having roles are the key to making these meetings work. Checking in with a round robin. Every time, that's what's worked in every meeting I've seen, where somebody steps up and says, let me just do a round robin with everybody sitting here. Because otherwise people just sit there and wait because they don't want to talk. And then when they all talk, it's all at the same time. So I know 12 people got together and we just said, let's do a round robin. And we just worked our way around. Everybody got a chance to talk before we open it up to anything else going on. As I said, try to practice with using screen sharing. When I have a presentation I want to make, I can share my document, or I could give that to somebody else and they could share it. I talked about backgrounds before visually, but just be aware of the background noise and asking people if they could turn off alerts on their phone and on their computer for the time you're in the meeting. I have a landline that rings in this room, so I have to remember to take it out of the room so that it doesn't ring while I'm sitting here. So just ask people to be aware of what noises might pop up and take care of those.
Hey, Jeanne, this is Jeanette.
Yep.
A little research said that if everybody unmutes and then remutes their microphones, it may help the audio.
Okay.
So if everybody wants to just give that a shot, let's do it and see what happens.
Okay.
So unmute and mute.
Say hello. Hello. Is it still doing the crackling noise?
Yeah, it's doing it a bit.
You got any other ideas?
No.
Okay.
Better. Maybe this was a good fix. Okay, how to unmute is to look at the microphone in the bottom left-hand part of your computer. And maybe you can't do that because we're on webinars. That's something that we can't do on a webinar. All right, we will see if we can do it on our end to unmute and mute everybody.
So I don't see it here.
All right, let's just move
end.
on. We'll see if we can find it behind the scenes.
Okay. You know what's going on right now is exactly what's going to happen in your meeting when you do it online. And it's like, truly what I found is people are patient. You just say, we're going to work it out. You figure out if it doesn't work, you hang up and I'll call back. You make it work. But I'm telling you, it's been amazing. Okay, it improved in the last minute. Well, that's a good thing, because annoying in audio is the pits. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to go back to the video, to the visual here, and talk about roles. What I was saying is it's important to assign roles, and you can pass them around at different meetings. The first one would be, let me move my cursor here out of the way. Oops. The idea of having a facilitator, very important. Now the facilitator might be the person running the meeting, but I've had people say, what if my board chair is not really good at running meetings to begin with? So it might be you have a facilitator and then someone running the meeting. The facilitator is one who's going to keep the flow going and be deliberate in calling on people and deliberate on moving it around. Your board chair might be somebody who is good at reading an agenda, but not necessarily good at facilitating at the same time. So that could be one person running the meeting and one person is the facilitator. And it doesn't have to be the executive director. You could assign somebody else that. Or it could be, I'm the executive director and I'm the facilitator and you're the board chair and you run the meeting. It could be one person who can do it. Just be aware, think of that through. The next idea is some kind of note taker. You could do notes. You could try doing note taking now on Google Docs where everybody can see what's happening as it's happening. I know this is your secretary. This probably doesn't shift around, but still it's just a role you want to think about. The next role would be some sort of technical support while you're on Zoom. You can see what's going on here. But you know, normally we don't have an issue with sound, but it's nice to have somebody who's paying attention. So maybe you get a staff member who can pay attention in the background, or maybe you just have, if it's some of your board members WebEx, they might be the one who has to also make sure the tech happens. So just be aware that if you use somebody's WebEx or somebody's corporate connection, they may be the only one that can make the correction should there be a correction needed. Just think of these things ahead of time. Another role is timekeeper. The timekeeper is somebody who just might say, it's 1:10, it's 1:20. You can decide how often you want them to give a time. We have 30 minutes left now. We have 15 minutes left. So they're doing a time check so that it's just not the same as being in a room. We have clocks all over, but we're not paying attention. Now here's a suggestion from somebody that gave to me. They said, we put the person as timekeeper, the one who talks the most, because that way they're paying attention to timing rather than talking. And they thought it might help. So just, you know, be kind of creative with how you do your different roles. And this next role is totally a fun role. And you throw it out there with laughter in your voice, but it's the idea of having a Yoda. And the Yoda could have a couple of different roles. The Yoda could be the person who talks about different than the facilitator, but they just kind of call on, here's what I'm seeing in the process right now. And you could call on them and say, Yoda, what are you seeing about how we're doing as a group? So another thing that's going on is right now, you might have 5 different board members who have a role in this meeting. So you're engaging people. They're not just sitting back here being passive, but they're helping out with technical support or they're helping out with timekeeper. And you think, okay, they're not thinking about our meeting agenda, but they are, and they're staying more engaged. And the Yoda person is watching the flow of the meeting. Another way I've seen Yodas being used is the idea of at the end of the meeting, they could talk about what worked in this meeting. And if you shift it around, different people do it each time, or they could lead the discussion at the end of the meeting that says, okay, folks, what do you think worked? What didn't work? Technology-wise, sharing-wise, what do we get better at? So you have a discussion. Yoda, don't forget that one. That one's the fun one. Now the idea of what would be some good rules of engagement. I've mentioned some of them, but I'm going to go through them now just for you to think about how do we put this out there. And the first one is to co-create your rules. Don't just show up with, here are 5 rules we're going to use. But ask people, what do we want to do about multitasking? What do we want to do about background noise? How do we want to work with each other? How do we want to do mute? Or is everybody good if we do it this way? So you kind of have a discussion. You could do that by email ahead of time. You could spend a few minutes when you're online. But what you're trying to do is get rid of all the annoyances of an online meeting by having some agreements. And if you come together to do this agreement, then what you're doing is kind of making everybody responsible for it to be a great meeting. It's not just you, the executive director, or you, the board chair. Everybody kind of has some ownership in making this a great meeting. So the next one, use people's names. Sometimes if you have more than like 9 or 10 people's faces, sometimes it's hard to find who's talking. So call on people by name, or have people say, this is Jeanne, if they start talking, maybe even wave their hands so that I can catch that. But I've noticed sometimes it can be hard for people to see who's talking, especially if they're on a smaller screen. People do call in on their iPhones, and people call in on iPads that are the smaller iPads. So not everybody can see really good. So it helps if you can get people just to use their names. If you got 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, it might work. You can poll the group in a couple of different ways. I showed you that visual at the beginning where you can get people to do annotations. I'm going to show you a couple more ideas, but you could write that into your agenda. And polling to me is not an official vote. It's just kind of saying to people, where are we on this issue? Are we all on the same page? Are we ready to take the vote? Do we need more information? And you're just kind of asking those questions that you might get a sense of if you were all in the same room. But when you're not, and you look around and can't tell, you want to have some ways to poll the group. The facilitator role is very important. It can be assigned, it could fluctuate, but you want to have the group agree on what they're willing to let the facilitator do. So the person's not stuck saying, all right, everybody, let's move on, and people aren't really listening because a lot of them are talking. So the question is, can you create polls on the fly, or they have to be created ahead of time? Well, I'm going to talk to you about polls. Like, for example, yes, you can set polls ahead of time. You can do polls of a different nature by using Google Docs and have people write in them. This is just, expand your brain way of thinking about polls. You could put a Google Doc up and put down 4 ideas and have people write their name under one. And you can do a shared Google Doc with people. You could do the picture I showed you of the slide that had the annotations you had to use. And I'm going to talk a minute about the idea you can do a poll with thumbs, visual. So those are if you want to be spontaneous with the poll, it's more going to be a visual or something with Google Docs. If you want to use the nice, fancy internal polling, yes, you'd have to ask ahead of time. And what I'm trying to focus on is the idea of what can you do on the fly? Because we all know about creating polls before webinars and putting in there. That's good. I just want you to think of what can you do on the fly with these? Let's take a quick sense now of where people are. Thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, or thumbs down as to whether we've talked enough about this idea, or are we ready to move on? Does that work for you? Thanks for asking. Be camera ready, okay, but what that means is just invite people ahead of time. Ask people ahead of time to be ready to put on the camera. If they're camera ready, they're more likely to come on. If they're not surprised, if they know that what we expect is to be visual. And this is you creating your rules, and you're saying, we really want to be able to see people. Even if you just check in at the beginning, and then every time we call on video, you're able to pop in and just be there for a minute because, your bandwidth isn't broad enough. So you want people to just be ready so they just don't avoid being on the camera. Create a common visual. So what's useful would be, as I said, a Google Doc, an Excel spreadsheet. It could be putting all of our faces on there where we see each other. And I can, if I'm in a meeting, I can unshare, and then suddenly everybody's faces pick up bigger, and we can look at each other for the discussion part. And then we can move back to a screen share to go to sharing on a Google Doc. So you can go back and forth, but you're just trying to create a way for your people to interact with each other. Asking people not to be involved in multitasking. An interesting thing I've been reading about supplement with other virtual comms communications. So it could be using chat boxes as well as verbal communication. I did something that was really fascinating yesterday with a group, and they were able to have private chat boxes. So I assigned, number 1 and 2 to talk to each other, number 3 and 4, number 5 and 6. So everybody put in a private chat with that person, and they went back and forth. So we were able to essentially give people pairs instead of the whole group. And so everybody was able to have a one-on-one text chat conversation with only one other person. And then we came back and had an even broader conversation. So just think of all the other ways you can supplement this with other virtual communications. Somebody's told me they use Slack. So that's something else to think about. Well, somebody said they have no thumbs. So I'm talking about this thumb right now on my hand you can use, and you can communicate this way if you're doing a meeting. So it's not necessarily the one that's in the annotations, it's the one on your hand. Aha, she says. Just trying to get you to think, yes, there's annotations and there's a thumb in there, but you also have the ability to do this. I'll show you a visual of a group that did that. This is another way of voting. Get people to put up 1 finger, 2. So this is just a way to think about it. no way, I really don't like this idea at all. I have some serious concerns is number one. I'm not going to go through all these. You see them. But the idea then is instead of just having a yes, no vote, and again, these are not legal votes. These are just kind of conversation movers. So we could say, we've talked about this issue. Let's get a sense where you stand. And you define this. You could just define 1 through 3 if this feels like too much. But the idea is you give people room to say no, but not quite as strong, like a number 1 or number 2. I'm not quite with you yet. I still have some issues. Or somebody can be totally neutral and say, I'm still in the middle on this. So it's the idea of having people vote. Everybody put up 3 fingers or 5 fingers, which here's my example. 0 to 2 would mean we don't have consensus yet if we have people in that area. 3 to 5 means we are considering this. There's a question here. How do you recommend doing a formal vote? I say a voice vote. Call everybody down. Bonnie, yes or no. Bill, yes or no. Beth, yes or no. Total voice vote. Get everybody speaking so everybody else can hear them. So you get the people on the phone and you get the people who are visual. And then you can say at the end, the vote was 6 to this and 3 to that. And remind everybody, here are the 3 who voted this way and here are the 6 who voted that way. So that it's caught in the minutes, it's caught verbally, and it's not going to miss anybody because you're doing it verbally. So if somebody else has an idea, you can type it in there and we'll share it. But I think kind of on a bottom line, that's a way of doing, I would do a verbal vote if it's an official business vote for the organization. But these are more kind of moving along with decisions, how we're talking about something. Are we ready to move on the topic? Has everybody got the information they need? And then you can move into a formal vote. This is the idea I was saying of polling. I just want you to expand your brain. Sometimes we think about the polling that's allowed in the program, but I want you to think about how can we just be spontaneous? We're at a moment and I just want to hear from people because I'm talking and I don't have any idea what people are. So let me just ask everybody on the board, how are y'all feeling about this idea? Or, are you together or we still got questions? This would mean, you're good and you're with the idea. So I'm putting my thumbs up. Hopefully you can see my face right now. And this would mean, a thumb sideways means I think we need to discuss more, and thumbs down is I'm not with it yet. So you just kind of can quickly poll people who are sitting right there having a discussion because I'm sharing some new idea. My committee wants everybody to talk about, and we're not ready for the vote. We just want to hear where you are. So think of a quick way to poll. And this is what it looks like. So that's just a quick visual of what it might look like if you asked everybody to give you a thumbs up or thumbs in the middle or thumbs down, and then you can verbally talk through that and keep going. So if I could see all you, I'd ask you to do that right now, but I don't see you. So I'm just going to assume you're all going, yes. Here's something else that I saw that I thought was very interesting. If you have access to somewhere that one person has, they could write something on a board. It's almost like you're facilitating a meeting, and then they could put their camera on it. Again, I'm just getting you to think outside the box of how you can communicate, how you can share information, how you can work with what you got. If you're somebody who has this material available, or you can go to your office because you're alone in the office, it might be another very effective way of having a discussion because you could write the answers as people say it. It's like Google Docs. It's just another way of getting people involved where everybody can see what's going on. Some ground rules on facilitating. And I would say you need to do it a little more, not less, because of the kind of the clunky nature of how we relate to each other when we're all online. As a facilitator, there ought to be a way that you share with people. Now, if you're on a board, you might want to share it with them. If you're doing some training with volunteers or other people, you don't have to necessarily share how you're creating this list, but you could have a lineup to call on people that can be alphabetical. It can be, if you work with locations, you could start with the south and work to the north. It could be people from the coast to the mountains. If you're statewide, if you're national or international, you could think through different countries and just do it that way. The 3 people who work here in Asheville and the 3 people who work somewhere in Africa, if you have that organization. So the idea is you kind of have a pattern of who you're calling on. As a facilitator, I've tried doing it following people's faces on the screen, but if somebody's muted their face and then they open it up, they get moved up to the top of the screen and it shakes everything up. So just be aware that you have a way to follow. You could make a list as people come on the call, and just call in that way. You can be totally random. And I would also set time limits for sharing and answering. And you could say to people, give me an answer and we'll give you about a minute. And at the end of the minute, have a bell that you ring or have the timekeeper make a noise if that's important. If you're trying to hear from 12 people and you want everybody to say something, you can move around and just say, if you take more than, say, 2 minutes, we're going to have to cut you off because we just want everybody to give us a minute thought here. This is blurry intentional because I want you to just see the big picture of it and not necessarily the details. This is one way you can think about facilitating. You can have a visual that you take notes, and as people come into your meeting, you can just assign them a place. This is for you, the facilitator, to follow so that you can do check marks or make notes as they talk, and then you can follow it through, and you know that one person is at 12 and one is at 1, and this time I'm going to start at 12, and the next time we have a conversation, I start at 3, but I still kind of follow the same order, but I start with a different person each time, and I can do a check mark, and that way I can, as the facilitator, track kind of that I'm calling on different people and bringing different people into the conversation. Not always the first and the last. This is the idea if you use a whiteboard, although you might be able to use this as well as a Google Doc. And with a whiteboard, you could have people, as they come into the meeting, they could sign their name in one of the blocks, so then everybody has a block they belong to. You could put this up at another time and have everybody write a comment at the same time. So you could use this like in a Google Doc. This was from a whiteboard idea, which you should Google tutorials in Zoom, and it has some great information about whiteboards. But you can also use this as a Google Doc. And the idea is I might sign in as number 2, and Chris has signed in as number 3, and Angela has signed in as number 4. And so we all kind of have a number. That could be the order that you call on people for facilitation. It could also be anytime we want to all make comments. It's just different than the chat box. It's a different way to get people involved. So you can have people make comments. Okay, everybody go to your number and just write a couple of comments what you think about what's going on with this issue that we're talking about. And then everybody can see what everybody's sharing. So just, again, a way to engage people. Somebody wants more information about the clock technique. So basically I would say what's good here is as people enter the room, you could put their name in the circle that corresponds to 12, 1, 2, or 3. As the facilitator, this gives me a visual, because sometimes I make a list and I write a long list of names as they come in, and it's a lot harder for me to keep track of. So this is more of a visual if you're a visual person, where you can write the names in there, and if you only have 8 people, you only fill in to number 8. And that way you have a visual for calling on people. You have a way to check off who's talked, and you can look down and see number 7s haven't talked at all, and whatever name I have in there. Again, I blurred it because it's a little bit, I didn't want you to sit there and read what they had written there. But the idea is this is for you, the facilitator, so that you can kind of keep track. Just make it work for you however. There's not like a research book on it. It was just like, I saw this idea and I thought this has real potential. So I think if you like it, you're going to make it work for you. And if you don't think it works, you might not be the visual kind. Again, we're back to our whiteboard, the idea of assigning people a space where they can write on. To me, this is a visual way in a way the chat box isn't, because the chat box can fly by you sometimes. Now, a great thing to do with a chat box, if you ask a question, is then I could call on Bonnie and say, Bonnie, can you read all the comments that are in the chat box? And just have somebody read it back. If there's only 8 or 10 of us, it's not like it's going to take forever. But that way you have a different voice reading it out. You've now got Bonnie involved in the meeting, and then you have somebody going back and looking at all the comments to that question. So I ask a question and say, okay, I want everybody to put down a thought about this. Post the question. And everybody chats and puts their stuff in the chat box. And then I'll say, okay, Bonnie, will you read all the answers of what we have so far? And then I could ask somebody else, what do you see that we have more of? You know, what was the pattern here? So there's a way you can like energize with the chat box and not just let it fly by. But you're using it intentionally again.
Jeanne, there's a question about the clock technique.
What was in the center? It looks to me like they used it to take extra notes, and they just said actions needed and concerns that people had. So I see it more as the clock technique of putting the names in there. And I think this person really adopted it to be a full note-taking piece for themselves. And it might be, I don't think each quarter of the clock, you see the pie shape, relates to those people as much as they designated something for each of the quarters, for each of the pie shapes, and they put some notes in there. But my picture of the blue table, the blue circle, I mean, and the chairs around it, or the people, I see that just as being your technique for the visualization of who's in the meeting. Christy, you asked that, and I think you need to let us know when you use it, because you're going to have some great ways, I bet. because I think, you know, the visual really hits some people. So some quick tips for keeping people involved. Stick to your agenda, have a fast-paced agenda. Yeah, it is like Camelot, a round table in the nights. Don't just do presentations. Remind people we need to share ideas and give them time limits. You know, don't let any presentation go for more than, say, 3 or 4 minutes without stopping and making sure you're getting feedback. Vary your voice tone. Ask people when they're presenting to make sure they speak with passion, or just, if somebody just talks like this the whole time, it gets really hard to follow them, right? So help people understand. Use some of the interactive ways. It doesn't even have to be the technology. It can be, how can you use the chat box? You can have individual chats, you can have group chats, you can have somebody read out the answers. You could use Google Docs. So there's really, the sky's the limit. And then there's all the tech pieces that we're not going into with Zoom that you could also use. And breakout groups, let me tell you, double check marks on that one. Ask provocative questions. So that again means you need to be ready ahead of time with some questions. You could have a check-in at the beginning with a round robin where you ask, don't just say, how's everybody doing? But you could have them say, you know, something that's a more pointed question that gets people going. And like you couldn't, these are all true for all meetings. They're just more important because we don't have the eye to eye that we could have otherwise. So it's just more important to be planned out a little more, but be flexible. If it doesn't work, keep moving. Have plants in the group. I mean, you would do that in a regular meeting, but I might call somebody up and say, Althea, I need you to be ready to speak on this question when I ask it. And so you kind of have a plant and you have somebody who's ready to go. So after the meeting, those are some ideas during the meeting, after the meeting. You know, the best part is either, like they say at the water cooler. Thank you, Althea. She just said, ready when you are. Okay, Althea. No, I don't have a question right now. But the water cooler is the idea where we all hang out. I personally think the best part of the board meeting often happens in the parking lot, right? Everybody's out there afterwards talking about what just happened. So build that into your build that into your online meeting. And what do I mean by that? Well, you could actually have this conversation at the end of your meeting. And this is just, I took a picture of a flip chart I had, but you could actually have either, again, like a Google Doc, and you could have people type in the 2 answers here. What worked best in this meeting? Because we're all learning, but what you're creating now is the idea that we're going to start assessing our meetings. Because some of the best information that comes out of Board Source says that boards that assess themselves have better productivity because they're stopping and looking at what are we doing. So even on a small level, if you start now by saying, what worked best in this meeting and what could we improve? They might focus on the technology, but we are developing this practice of saying, let's look back and see what worked. So you're starting to bring that out. With the Google Doc, here's a question. Would the Google Doc be pulled up outside of meeting, but you share on your screen? So I, as a facilitator, would have a Google Doc open, and then I would need to bring that up on my screen, which I might not be having PowerPoints. You could have a Google Doc sitting up there, and I could ask, let's see, who's somebody else on this meeting whose name I haven't called on? I could ask somebody else. Louisa, she could have the Google Doc ready and put it up. And then we share screen, because within us, we have the ability to share screens in a Zoom meeting. So we have different people have a different screen ready. And one person's going to have the Google Doc where we can write on it, and another person's going to have the Google Doc where we evaluate. And we say, Louisa, you need time for you to share your screen. Then we can share it all afterwards. You can bring it up in the meeting. But each person would have to have the doc up, correct. It's helpful if you have the doc open and ready. You can do that all on one screen. I have 2 screens, so I'm able to use my computer screen and a monitor. Not everybody has that, but I could have things open on here, and then you just click where it says share screen, and if you have it already open on your document behind the Zoom meeting, you can then click on that, and that's what would show up. I mean, those technical pieces, they're going to vary whether you're on Google Docs or whether Google Hangouts, or whether it depends on the platform, but just practice. Now that I've said you can do it, learn how. That's where we are. Kind of go figure it out for what works for the system you're on. A couple more things I want to share with you because I know we're getting tight here on the time. I'll just talk about how you can use tech tools. None of these are any name brand. These aren't any platforms. These are just ideas. The idea that you can collaborate, you can communicate. There's platforms. There's just some nitty gritty stuff. There's team building, and there's miscellaneous. So I'm just going to show you this list. You're going to see the slides to think back on it. But we all have a chance to really up our skills, and that's what I see as the best part of this. It's like, why not learn this? People are patient. They're willing to learn, practice. Because you may find when we get back to what we think is going to be reality again, you might find that every other board meeting we're in person and every other board meeting we meet we meet remotely, so that we change our patterns that way. And that way it makes it easier for people to be at the board meeting because they only have to drive somewhere. So we don't know what's going to happen. But here's the idea behind collaboration is sharing docs. You might use Box, Dropbox, Google. There's lots of ways to share. You can do planning with your documents. You can do brainstorming. That was that example of the whiteboard with the 12 pieces, 12 boxes, or you could use a Google Doc and have everybody typing at the same time. That's work, by the way. Everybody, let's brainstorm. Let's go to this Google Doc, which I'm going to share now, and I want each one of you to be able to, now here's how the Google Doc works as well, is you send the link to everybody, and they can open it up on their computers. I have to think through this because I've used it in different ways, and they can open up a Google Doc, just practice to see how that works. It's a common practice that people intersperse Zoom meetings in Google Docs. So you can do brainstorming. The idea of communication, we've talked about different ways you can do group chat. You can pair people up for to chat. You can do video calls, the different ways you can do polling. You can show visuals. I mean, I could show a picture that's on my phone and get people to talk about that. And we can use voice. So it's like, think beyond how you can move in and out of all these different possibilities. Meeting platforms, we might use Zoom, Skype, Teams, Hangouts, WebEx, and there might be more, and I'm sure there will be in the next month coming. People's going to invent something. The nitty gritty is understanding who has access and what makes access. What are your passwords that you might need? Do you do project management tools, and do they connect in? What's your workflow in terms of how things, like if you use a Google Doc, how are you going to get back into your minutes? Just think through some of those pieces. And of course, security. The team building, you can do breakouts. You can do chats. You can do like a think and write and have everybody think through the answer and then do handwritten and share it, because that gets the people who think as well as the people who talk. I could talk first, but some people need to think first. You want both of them to be available in your meeting. You could have doing sharing. You can have people do appreciation for what's working. These are all team building pieces that you could build into the beginning of your meeting or the end of your meeting. And under miscellaneous could be the idea of how do we assign roles? How do we use whiteboards? How do we use breakout groups? What's the facilitator? So these are all just kind of some ideas. And then another piece about online possibilities. You know what? We're all doing better than we think. We all are doing better than we think, because you know probably several of these on here. Even if you think I'm at the beginning of the tech continuum, you've done several of these. Screen sharing, project management. If you haven't done it, you know what it means. So we actually are all pretty more advanced than we think. So out of these 13, I would say most of you probably have a good sense of at least 3 of them, if not 4. And so pat yourself on the back and go, you know what, I'm doing better than I think, because there's a lot of collaboration possibilities. Because what you're looking at when you're on these online meetings is how can we collaborate and not just be one person talking and everybody's sleeping. You know, you really want an interactive meeting. And I'm telling you, I've been in them, it's possible. And it's very exciting because you really do connect when you have that visual. So final tip would be identify what makes a good meeting and pull that into your meeting. Virtual meetings need strong facilitation. It's not just going to happen. It needs to be a little more intentional. Plan ways, write them in. We're going to do a chat box. I'm going to do a chat box where I assign people talk to just one other person. We're going to do a group chat. Kind of have your ideas laid out so that you're not sitting there at the top of the moment having to think about it. And like today, just be ready for tech challenges and roll with it and say to people, we're doing our best. We're learning. Okay, so I would love if some of you would type into the chat box, because this was very one way, because we had so many people who were interested in being here. We wanted to keep it as many people as possible. I would like to hear what's one idea you're going to try. Let's see what people type in there. And I don't know, Jeanette, did I miss any other of the questions?
I don't think so. Not that I'm seeing on my end.
So people are going to try Yoda. Althea, let me know what happens. Okay, whiteboarding, icebreaker for sure. The picture of the feet. So you get everybody take a picture right now of your feet and share it on their phone. Annotations, doing the round robin. I love the idea of having folks dial in early to practice. Icebreakers and Yoda. The icebreaker's great. And you know what? You're going to come up with an even better one. I'm planning to use an interactive Google Doc. And all y'all have got these great ideas. Then you should send them in to Jeanette and she can then share them with everybody else what worked. The clock technique, maybe. Yeah, you got to make it fit you. I like the roles to get more people engaged using a whiteboard. trying to collaborate. Louisa, just go through the list and think, what are 3 ways I could try to do collaboration? Breakouts. It'll blow your mind how much fun those are. I mean, people really like them. Round robin, call on folks to speak. That's what I do. And I just say, okay, Angelique, will you answer? And then next I go, Beth, will you answer? And Chris, will you answer? You can tell I'm in the ABC, so I got to get down here to another name. Judy and Julie. Okay. Is there one platform better than another based on number of attendees? I think that I'm not going to answer that because I don't know. I think it has to do with how much money you have and what kind of, where you want to expend. I mean, Zoom has worked for 3 people and I've been on it with 35 people. So I would say, what's your what is it you want to have happen? What money do you want to spend? What kind of interaction do you want to have? Deliberate facilitation, yes. Deliberate just meaning focused and intentional and not just, oh, it's going to happen. Switching roles. Joseph Jameson says switching roles, and that's true. I didn't quite emphasize that. At the next meeting, different people should have that role. Annotations and facilitation clock. I think we got a lot of people's ideas in here. I think the sky's the limit. I mean, I think I've excited you today, and now you're going to leave and you're going to get excited and you're going to try some of these and you're going to say yes, and you're going to share some of these ideas with each other, because that's really what happens. I've gotten addicted. No, I've gotten excited. And so I go to meetings and I watch what other people do now and I pick up from them, and I go to webinars and learn, and then I come back and share them with you, and then you get excited and you're going to share them with your board, and then they're going to get excited. That's kind of what's going on now. Dance competition. Okay, Jonathan Hartzell, what is a dance competition? Because I did see that in a meeting where they had everybody stand up in the meeting and they said, we're going to spend 10 seconds doing an ugly dance, and everybody had to stand up and do an ugly dance. Is that what you mean, Jonathan? He wrote dance competition. So then you can have your visuals ready. So I have visuals ready. Everybody put your thumbs up or thumbs down. So, and then I have my little funny thing where I can go, oh no. So you can have a few visuals ready if you want to. But yes, the dance competition, I did see that where one group said, okay, everybody halfway through the meeting, stand up and sit down. Let's move everybody around, or everybody give, a high five, or everybody do an ugly dance. Nobody has to worry. And that way you catch who's on their pajamas. Any other questions y'all want to write in here? Any other thoughts? These are some great ideas. 7th inning stretch. Yes, you could call it your 7th inning stretch. That's true. That's a great way to think about it. But to get everybody up and moving around. I really didn't go into a lot of movement, but that's another idea they talk about. One idea I heard from another webinar I was on was to have all your board members, when you're in a board meeting, not volunteers, specifically when you're doing this with board members, have everybody get up and go find something in their house and bring it back that speaks to them about what this nonprofit's about. And maybe I come back with my pen and I can tell you a good story about how a highlighter tells me something, and maybe I come back with a paper clip and I can tell you what, just get everybody. So that gets everybody up and back, and that's kind of a round robin, and it's a team building, and it just gets people connection. But with a board, I think that could work because hopefully they have some idea of what the organization, what the mission is and what it's doing, and they would be easier to go find something in their house. We're getting close to the time we're going to end. Any other comments you want to add in here? I mean, a number of you put ideas in here, so I really appreciate you sharing your ideas. I think you're going to have fun with this. Don't you think so? I mean, I wish you could all do a resounding yes, yes, but I think you will. I have been on some meetings that were quite fun. Okay, good. Somebody finally said yes. Good. People found it helpful. I'm glad for you, and you'll see the slides, but I think the magic really is in you taking some ordinary thoughts and thinking, how can we get people to collaborate? Thank you for the yeses. There's Jonathan again.
Thank you so much, Jeanne. Somebody was just asking how they'll receive the recording and the printed documents. We'll email them after the webinar. It'll take just a little bit for the recording to process, but we'll email that along with a survey link also for y'all to give us a little bit of feedback. Just for anyone who's interested, we did a little research about the audio, and it sounds like there were other devices interfering with the audio. Probably here at my home office, where I have 4 people working at online school and online work. So Bluetooth seems to be an interference. So next time I'm going to send everybody outside for a big long walk when I do a webinar and see what happens. Thank you so much, Jeanne. Really appreciate you doing this for us. So many great ideas that we've learned. And also just want to do a shout out for Pathways funders who help us put everything together that we do. The Community Foundation of Western North Carolina, United Way of Asheville Buncombe, Cherokee Preservation Foundation, Kate B. Reynolds, Duke Endowment, so many great foundations that are supporting the work of nonprofits across Western North Carolina and the whole state. So thank you guys so much. I'll sign us off here and be looking for an email from us very soon. Thanks, everybody.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jeanne.